Welcome to The Real Photo Show. My guest today is Odette Elix England, and we are going to talk about three of her books, The Long Shadow, To Be Developed, To Be Continued, and Isn't X Beautiful? And we're going to talk about our time at the Chico Review, which was just fantastic. I really loved getting to know Odette. And we're going to talk about how Odette gets into photography, her life growing up on a farm, her relationship with her daughter, which is very much in the work, and just so many other things. It was really a conversation that I think could have gone on for hours if I didn't have any self-control. So let's start with The Long Shadow. The Long Shadow, let me click on books. The Long Shadow's full title is Unwrapped, Marion Post Wolcott's Labor and Love. And it explores Marion Post Wolcott's life, the expectations she had post-FSA, becoming a farmer's wife, the idea that she stopped photographing, which wasn't true. And this book is so brilliantly put together. There are images from Odette, images from her daughter, and images from Marion Post Wolcott that we've never seen before. And she collaborated with Wolcott's family, and it's just, like I said, brilliantly put together. It is unfortunately sold out in the U.S. There are some signed copies in Australia. It was published by Libraryman. But if you were a member of the Charcoal Book Club, sponsor of the show, you actually would have received the book. It's actually how I got my copy of the book. I just received Calling the Birds Home by Cheryl St. Ong, and I published a reel on that. That is a really beautifully made book, as well as the photos. 31 Days by Christopher Lowell I just received, and I will publish a reel about that very soon. And then the next book of the month is Documentation of the War by Vladislav Krasnoshuk, and I apologize for that pronunciation. And I will publish a reel about that as well as soon as I get it. The latest book, Isn't X Beautiful, published by the Ice Plant, is just out this week. And Odette will be at the LA Art Book Fair this Saturday, May 9th, 2 p.m., at booth B29, or maybe it's a table, I'm not really sure, with the Ice Plant, again, who published the book. And you can get your book signed there if you had plans to attend the book fair. And of course, we will also talk about To Be Developed, To Be Continued, which actually in some ways is a continuation of Odette's relationship with her daughter, thinking about that, photographing that as she becomes a teenager. And again, we talk about that on the show. And then there's Isn't X Beautiful, which is just this brilliantly written book. And I'm using that word a lot, but I mean it. Brilliantly written book, again, published by the Ice Plant, where Odette explores the letter X in this way that connects different parts of her life, but also makes it pretty apparent that it is present in our lives as well, particularly if you're a photographer. And if you just think about it for a second, I think you'll understand that. But more importantly, it's the way this book is written. It's autobiographical. It has really interesting and fun and important facts about the history of photography in it, as well as just great sort of humor and poignancy. And I don't know, I can't say enough about it. I read it in a way where I kind of devoured it. And I have Odette read a passage as well from the book, and we talk about that pace and we talk about the way it's written. And I think you'll really not only enjoy the episode, but I think you should get this book. I just love the way it's written. And I loved learning so much more about Odette. All right, I think that's all I have for now. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the show, and we will talk soon. Odette Elix England, welcome to The Real Photo Show. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Also, so nice to see you. So nice to have spent a decent amount of time together at the Chico Review.
What a full-on week that was. It was so fun and so intense, and so many generous, thoughtful, alive people talking about photography. It was great.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know, the best thing. The best thing is, the conversation, but it's the conversation with people you either are getting to know or people you've admired, and maybe people you only see once every few years. It's such an incredible gathering.
It really was. It's an intense week, but there's so much joy that people bring to the experience and to the event and to each other. I missed it after I left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's so intense. It's almost like it takes a couple days to get back into a rhythm, like pre-Chico.
It does. It feels like going away when you were a kid and you get home and you think, oh, I really miss all of that. And you're very aware that a part of you is still back there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I had to go right back to work the next day and teach. And the nice thing about that is I can talk about it. The downside is I just wasn't ready. So how about you give everyone some background, a little bit of your origin story? Or a lot of it, for that matter.
My origin story. I grew up in southern Australia in a very remote rural area. We were part of a group of, or a collective, I suppose, of dairy farmers, and everything felt far and everything felt free and everything felt logistically, geographically separated, but in that separation came enormous opportunity to be imaginative and to enjoy looking at the land and thinking about the world differently, which you only realize after you leave that place. I majored in painting when I was the first person in my family to go to university. And after that, I did a number of different jobs in writing and archiving and looking after photographs, being like a photograph custodian, but not really making my own until I went back to university after I moved to London and studied photography. And then I never let go of it, or it never let go of me. It never put me down after that. So I feel like
was it a kind of a letdown or maybe a surprise when you chose art, being the first person to go to university?
It was. Especially when I said to my dad that I wanted to study painting, he said, well, I could teach you painting here on the farm. And I already had some experience painting walls and floors, but it wasn't something that certainly kids who grew up in the community I did, we weren't encouraged necessarily to go to university. There wasn't an expectation we would. And for girls, we were thought to be staying on the farm or to be marrying a farmer and to continue the tradition of being a farmer's wife. So for me to then move to the city and to study something as unusual as it seemed to everyone else who lived there as painting, I was very quickly aware that I thought very differently.
Mm-hmm. And just hearing you say that is like looking at your work and looking at, I'm thinking of The Long Shadow as you're speaking, and Isn't X Beautiful, which we'll speak about, is so much of that is in your work. But please keep going.
Yeah. So after I moved to London and I was enjoying making pictures, I was enjoying sneaking into the backs of theatres and taking photographs of actors as they were preparing to go on stage. And it was this idea of watching one body or one personality dissolve and then another body be inhabited by that individual that I really enjoyed. And I don't think that went away either. I enjoy photographing people. I especially spend a lot of time photographing either my immediate family, including my daughter. And when I moved to the United States in 2010, I began this unusual geographical love loss kind of story back to where I grew up, because I was about as far removed on the planet as I could be. It's 17,000 miles between Rhode Island and where I grew up. And I think that distance changed what I was looking at photographically, how I was writing and how I was thinking about image production, involving my parents in my work a great deal more. And that has carried through to today.
When does writing become a big part of your practice?
Writing has always been something that I was encouraged to do, even as a kid. I was thinking about this a few weeks ago, because when it was too hot to be outdoors at the farm, we would be inside, not really making art. It was more making collage or something that was akin to craft, or being encouraged to read the Bible, or baking cookies, or in my case, we were given a blank piece of paper and, draw or write. And I liked to write. So it was never sold to me as being something about production or about being perfection or about fearing the page in any way. The page became a space of opportunity and potential, and I didn't have to worry about being good because I didn't understand what good or bad was in terms of writing. My exposure to writing at that point, even when I was in elementary and middle school, was very limited. It was a rural school. We didn't have a lot of books at home. The school's library wasn't extensive, and my exposure to words, especially when I was young, was the local newspaper. So when I was reading, it was usually the newspaper. It was usually about stock or about animals in some way, but it was very concise writing. And so
not stocks, actual animal stock.
Actual animal stock. So it was...
Agrarian animal stock, yes.
That's right. So I was exposed to a very concise kind of writing if I was reading. And then because we were so remote, one of my biggest tools, I think, was probably my imagination. I could imagine things and places so far away from where I was, places I hadn't seen, people I hadn't met, experiences I hadn't understood or been involved with first person. Like I remember the first time I went to the cinema, I was probably 12 or 13 years old. I didn't understand that you could go to a movie theatre and see a film. So my imagination was a bit wild and a bit frenzied, and I would be happy to sit at the table and write these stories. So I was never afraid of it. And when I did go to college and did go to university, that imagination part of my writing stayed, and I enjoyed it for pleasure, and I enjoyed it as an escape. And I never, ever worried about it was too many words or too many metaphors. I didn't understand what metaphors were. So it's always been part of something that I had honed from very early on, but in a different way, perhaps to had I grown up somewhere else.
Yeah, and I think we'll probably get back to that early sort of freedom to write when we talk about Isn't X Beautiful, because that feels very free in a lot of ways. When do you start teaching? You're at RISD and Brown?
I am. So I started teaching after I finished grad school at RISD in my final year. We were all, as grad students, given the opportunity to teach a class, and I developed my own class called Interrogating Snapshots and talked about the history of snapshot and popular vernacular photography, but it was a very hands-on studio class, and I loved it. I went back to Australia for a very short time. I got a tenure-track job teaching at the University of South Australia, teaching darkroom and digital classes. But when I was seduced to come back to the United States in 2016, I continued on teaching. I've taught at RISD since then. I've taught at Brown for the past 4.5 years. I've taught at Amherst College. I've taught at Bucknell University. And I can't imagine not doing it. I think being around students and the energy and the growth and the passion of minds as they're developing and questioning and being curious about the world and trying to make sense of not just their place in it, but what they can create and bring to the world, not even by making, just by being, is so generative. They're so passionate, and I can't imagine my life without that.
Well, I had the privilege of just speaking with two of your former students, Lily Coleman, who teaches with me at Mercer County Community College, and Kevy Henley-Byrne, who was showing at the gallery at the time as part of a show that Lily curated. And they sing your praises. They also mentioned that you created a class about failing.
I did. I had read a couple of books around failure related to art making that I really enjoyed. And it seemed astonishing to me, and I'm sure it's built into the curriculum of colleges or schools elsewhere in the world, the idea that failure wasn't something that you would run toward or that you would embrace or that you would consider to be at all in any way positive, because it's so embedded in art making. Things go wrong, things go awry, things don't turn out the way that we expect them to. And in that can be a sense of wonder and beauty and discovery. And so we had a class around called Failed It. And
That's it. Yeah.
it was a studio class in which we thought about failure not only as a condition of the process of art making, but as a kind of material, and that we could use failed elements of objects or failed images or anything collaterally that we could incorporate into our photo practice, which was considered very wide, very experimental, that the wrongness could form a kind of rightness. And then we looked at theory alongside of that at the same time. And it was so fun. I was doing the class with the students, and then I taught a version of her at Amherst College as well. And it was so fun. And I feel like that's one of the best things about teaching too. You should get out of bed in the morning and say, I'm going to get up and play. Not I'm going to get up. I'm going to get up and work. I'm going to get up and play, and I'm going to get up and fail. It's so much, it's much more loose and relaxing.
Absolutely. And I've been experimenting with my 200 level courses in the same way. Just first, like, what do the students really want to do? Instead of me telling them, here's the curriculum, here's what we need to get done, just sort of like opening it up, saying, what do you want to do in this class? And, I show them every format, every medium, from cyanotype to 4x5 film to digital to drone. And I say, you pick it. You pick what you want to do. And let's just figure out how that fits into documentary photo, how that fits into photo two. You tell me. And also, maybe I'm saying it too much on the podcast now, but I've been just preaching embracing the process over results. I mean, results are important, obviously, but just if you can't embrace the process, you're just going to burn out very quickly. And so, like, you've just got to love making work, even if the results aren't what you expect.
Exactly. And I think one of the things I remember from teaching these variants of Failed It was that we all make things that we're uncertain about, that we're not proud of, and that we put to one side. And instead of them being in a cupboard or a dark space, in week 1 or 2, we would bring out and we would share them, and we would talk to them. We talk to each other about them. We would present them and say, here's this failed thing. And then we would swap with each other. And then those others would take away this failure and turn it into something else, not trying to make it into a success, not trying to make it into something that was grander, bigger, or better, but just to transition it from being one form to another form. And so we were thinking much more about the form of material and the form of creation than we were about whether it was good.
I really love that, because I think it also teaches humility, because you're not trying to one-up each other, and you're also open to someone taking something maybe you worked really hard on and just making it their own. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And I feel like art making should be that very collaborative, generative, generous, vulnerable kind of process, because that is what it's like in our studios. Oftentimes when we're working alone, it feels like we are genuinely alone in the process, not just by ourselves, but that the process is unique to us, which in some ways, yes, it is, but that assumes that someone else isn't experiencing the same kind of struggle or worry or confusion or distraction or dislocation from our ideas that we are.
Yeah, absolutely. On that note of this collaborative idea, in the work that you did with On the Long Shadow, Unwrapped, Marion post Wolcott's Labor and Love, you collaborated with your daughter on this work.
I did. I collaborated with my daughter. I collaborated with Marion post Wolcott's surviving family, her daughter Linda, her granddaughters Carrie and Robin. I collaborated with the people of Loudoun County, Virginia. And I feel like a little too with this idea of how Marion was presented to me through her photographs, through the writings of others, through the experience of others curating her work or writing about her work, but then through her own archives. The Center for Creative Photography in Tucson in Arizona holds the largest collection of her personal archives, right down to postcards, receipts,
oh, wow,
personal pictures. And so it was her voice talking back to me. I spent a couple weeks there. So it was very much it wasn't just a collaboration photographically. It was also then just building the story, building the words that are in the book, building the research that went into making it feel alive and true to Marion's spirit.
So I didn't know this. Marion Pulse Wolcott was born in Montclair, New Jersey, right next door to me. Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of really interesting little facts about someone's history when you start really getting into the weeds, where they grow up, do they have siblings, what's their favorite color, where did they like to visit on weekends. It starts to piece together someone that the photographs, in this case Marion Post Wolcott's photographs, don't necessarily suggest, hint, even tend toward any of this lovely backstory.
Well, and also I think, not that I think you identify necessarily with her actual lived life, but with the expectations on her life. I see a lot of parallels in your life as well, coming from a farm, the expectations of what your role was going to be. You know, so Marion Post Wolcott starts off, well, I guess we get to know her from the FSA period under Roy Stryker and photographing the Depression era. And then there are all of these assumptions about who she is and why and how she makes work because she's a woman. I mean, to the point where I think you say in the book, she was told she was too beautiful or too pretty. And we'll get to a quote that you end this book on with Roy Stryker. But that idea of then marrying a farmer and everybody thinks her career is over, that was some kind of a choice she had to make. And yet it's not. And even though the work is there, post becoming a farmer's wife and having that life, even though she kept photographing, it feels like history has decided that was the end of her photographic career.
That's right. And that's what I discovered that was so compelling to me, that 11 years of her life after leaving the Farm Security Administration, after being given this ultimatum by her boss, Roy Stryker, and her husband, Lee Wolcott, that she had to choose family or love and her career, photography. She chooses love and family and she moves to Loudoun County, Virginia. But those 11 years don't count to biographers. They don't count to historians. The images that she made during that time, the assumption was she didn't make images, but it didn't seem like anyone really went into any trouble to look.
Yes.
There were a couple that were published in one of her bios, and that's what got me. I'm like, 11 years, everyone assumed she didn't take pictures, but there's this reference to her making photographs, and I thought she couldn't have just made 2 or 3. And that was true. She made many, many more. But over the years, the negatives were either lost or stolen, the prints were lost or stolen. And then there's this small selection that her daughter Linda has. And it was me connecting to her family, actually through her granddaughter Carey, that I discovered that they existed. And this wasn't difficult. You know, it's a few phone calls and a few emails, and suddenly this whole other world of Marion's life opens up, and you learn that Marion was very much held back, intimidated by, reduced by her husband, and that this directly impacted and affected her ability to make photographs, but to have confidence perhaps in her photography. And her daughter Linda and granddaughter Carey especially spoke about this and told these beautiful, sad, poignant stories that they remember from when Marion was alive.
And you include excerpts of those transcripts in the book, and it's written, I don't know whether to say like a long form poem or stanzas from a poem. Right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I had very long conversations with Marion's family. They were all recorded. I transcribed them all. I shared them all with the family. And originally I had thought I would write a much more formal essay, perhaps, but it didn't feel right for the way in which her family spoke about her and her work. So I tried writing something much more loose, and I gave it a name in the end. I called it Inheritance Poetry because it's like the open prose of someone else's legacy told through the surviving family. So I used direct quotes and descriptions and phrases from those interview transcripts but I didn't do it in this very structured sentence, paragraph kind of way, because that's really not how they spoke. They spoke so beautifully and openly, like looking at the open sky, and their words were the clouds going by. And so that's how I wrote. I kept imagining them just talking as if they were these clouds in the sky.
And you titled it She Had to Have Clouds.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if part of that She Had to Have Clouds title comes from that end note from Roy Stryker as almost like a response where, and I'll just read it. This is from Roy Stryker to the photographers. Emphasize the idea of abundance, the horn of plenty, and pour maple syrup over it, Mix well with white clouds and put on a sky blue platter. I know your damn photographer's soul writhes, but to hell with it. Do you think I give a damn about a photographer's soul with Hitler at our doorstep? You are nothing but camera fodder. And I feel like that title is a defiant response to that note to say, don't pay attention to your soul. And also, I found this quote from Marion Post Wolcott, who spoke at a conference in 1986. She only passed away in 1990. She spoke at a conference in Syracuse, and she said, "Women have come a long way, but not far enough. Speak with your images from your heart and soul." And I feel like even that, this is all in defiance of what Roy Stryker wanted.
Indeed. Roy had very particular ways of telling the photographers in writing at the time at the FSA exactly what he was looking for from them in terms of photographs, right down to the specifics of a horse should look sad or a picket fence should look forlorn. There were these particular words and phrases that he used, and they were in Marion's archive, these letters and these descriptors. And the one that you had read out from Roy was one that I found in Marion's archive notes, and it was too good to be true. I had already decided that of the name of what Marion's piece of writing would be. And when I saw that, and it was actually printed on a sky-ish blue-grey paper, that had to be the quote that I used. Because Marion would say, and her daughter and her granddaughter remember this, about photographs really needing clouds, especially when you were in a big landscape kind of environment.
And just to give everyone a sense of the way the transcriptions were turned into prose, I will read a small part. Is that all right?
Sure.
A big part of the story, people asked her to photograph. Daddy got mad. You don't need a camera to see that. An allowance, a tightrope. Film sent to New York. Daddy got mad. He did not want her to spend money on photographs in the neighborhood or anywhere. There was still love at the end. Also, intense control and dependence. That's the story. Women who could not continue their work. That's just one part of this book. There's also unpublished work from Wolcott, and then there are the photographs that you make and your daughter makes throughout the book, all, in this beautiful homage to Marion Post Wolcott. So it's really not surprisingly a book that's filled with these beautiful layers.
It was so fun to make, and it all started from a quote that I found when I was doing some research in the Archives of American Art at the Smithsonian, when Marion had been interviewed in 1965, and she had said something along the lines of there being an assumption that if a man was photographing something, that it would just inherently be better and it would work. Mm-hmm. And that if a woman did it, it would not. And that's what really started this 3.5-year journey of driving back and forth to Virginia once or twice a year for 3.5 years with my daughter, and trying to look for these places in and around Loudoun County, because her and Lee lived on 3 different dairy farms while they were there, finding out where these plots of land were and what was still there, what was missing. And my daughter and I sort of forming this unusual bond with someone that we would never get to meet through story and through Marion's daughter and then her granddaughters. So it was beautifully nuanced and not at all planned. That's just how the story wrote out.
And looking at your photos and your daughter's photos, it must have felt incredibly familiar.
It did. There were so many places that we were visiting. So we were spending a lot of time in Lovettsville, Purcellville, in and around, like from Harper's Ferry down. And there were buildings, there were times of day, there was the way the light would behave in and around Virginia there that, at least to me, felt very familiar from where I grew up. But because my daughter has also been back to where I grew up, she would say, wow, this looks like Nana's and Grandpa's farm. And she would point out things that she thought she recognized because these were made, she would have been, like, this would have been between the ages of her being 9 or 10 and then maybe 13 or 14. And when we would once a year go back to Australia and back to the farm, but she would forget which farm was which, and she would say, "Oh, but that's Marion's," and I'd say, "No, that's ours." And so the story would start to, overlap for her too.
Oh yeah. So that does lead into your next book, To Be Developed, To Be Continued, which is a great title because it is a continuation of this photographic relationship you have with your daughter, who's now entering her teenage years. And yet that book ends on the idea of to be continued as well.
That's right. So that book came about. I was on an artist residency at Photo Access in Canberra, Australia for 6 months. And I went there with this plan of what I was going to photograph and then ditched the plan within 2 weeks because my daughter and I were just trying to discover this place that neither of us had lived in before, that felt somewhat familiar because it was Australia, and that had I not had a camera to my eyes every day, and had I not been on residency, and had I not been looking at her through this very small rectangular window, I don't think I would have noticed quite as intently the differences in her behavior and her mannerisms changing from 12 to 13 and how, back to those very early photographs I was making in London in my 20s when this one identity would just start to fall away and another one would grow. And watching my daughter think, I'm sure she wasn't consciously thinking, oh, I don't do that anymore, or I'm becoming an adult, or these childish behaviors are leaving me. It was just that I think she's aware that she's growing up and that the way we behave as we grow up, because we're taught so early, grow up, act your age, don't be childish. And yet the entirety of our lives, assuming that we live for a very long time, the time we get to be kids is so short. And I was thinking about this, we don't get to rejuvenile. Adults get cold very quickly. As children, we stay very warm and we just bounce off the world like a trampoline. And so that's what I began photographing, and that turned into To Be Developed, To Be Continued.
Yeah. And so I don't have this book yet. I do have to pace myself with the amount of books I buy. I now have 2 of your books. Well, I have a preview of one of your books. But yes, the book is a combination of landscape and portraiture, but also the more abstract kind of work. The flowers are close up and fuzzy and in color, and sometimes the people are fuzzy and out of focus in the background, and the landscape is in focus. And there's a real memory quality to the imagery, I believe.
Yeah, I wanted to, sometimes often in my case, the work will tell me what it wants to be. And I couldn't figure out how I was going to talk about this period of time of going from 12 to 13 and my turning from 48, 49 to 50, how I could do that.
That's right. I didn't mention this. This isn't just about your daughter. This is also about you and this relationship. Right.
And that she's quite happy to be visible, but comfortable being invisible. And I'm much more happy to be visible, but turning invisible. So there's the way that we're being looked at. There's a way that we are looking at ourselves. There's a way that she's happy, my daughter's happy for me to photograph her, and I'm happy to be photographed, but she's much more interested in the landscape and the objects around her. And it became like a study of all of the things that photography is completely incapable of, but that some of the pictures taught me. Like there are these little gummy ends where I'm right at the end of my film. I was shooting medium format, and at the end or the start of the 120 roll, you would have these little strips. And so the mistakes and the errors and those failures, the idea of the foreground being very out of focus or the background falling away, these errors or things that looked like errors became a way for me to talk about myself and to talk about invisibility and to talk about what happens when a mother's eye changes based on what they're looking at, and a transaction of love that happens between looking and noticing and who's doing that looking and who's doing the noticing.
Yeah, there's this is reminding me. There was a moment we had at Chico where we were just laying on the grass. It was me, you, Andrea, Parlato,
Carolyn, I think.
Carolyn Drake was there. That's right. And we were talking about daughters and teenage daughters, and I thought, oh yeah, you and I could talk a long time about this.
Daughters unite. There's something very special about when you have a daughter in their teenage years, and it transforms. They're transforming, and you are transformed by them.
Absolutely. So why don't we talk about your book, which is now in pre-order. What is the date for Isn't X Beautiful, published by the Ice Plant, to come out?
I think it's May the 1st.
Okay. Oh, so soon. This episode might be out just at that time. Yeah.
Oh, good, because I'm signing
or maybe
books.
A week earlier.
I'm signing it. I'll
good.
be signing it at the LA Art Book Fair.
Oh, excellent.
Yes, I can't wait.
I was able to read this book with a little preview. Thank you for that. And I was sort of just blown away by how it flowed. I told someone as I was reading it, I almost felt like I had a runner's high from reading it. There's a pace to it that is so interesting. You know, it's just this sort of in and out and time moving. And somebody said, it has a very stream of consciousness, but I think that underplays what it is, because I think it's so well planned. And when people say stream of consciousness, there's a kind of, just like everything sort of spills out and, without a lot of structure. This is highly structured, highly planned. The way you play with the letter X as this stand-in for so many things, but also the history of how it's been used and the way it leads you through different parts of the book, from personalities and representation and just symbols and sounds. The sounds I loved the sounds. If I say anything you feel like is too much, giving away too much, just let me know. We can cut it out. But there's a really beautiful moment at the end of the book where you confirm a lot of things that you are picking up on as you go. You sort of give this confirmation. It's like, that is what you were doing. Oh yes, that is what you were saying. That is what I was hearing as I was, listening in my own head to the sounds. And I really love that, because I think as people read this, they are also sort of, figuring out what's happening while they're reading it, right? In the way that it flows, and thinking about, well, how did you end up picking this, and this, and then move to this? And are you picking these words because they have this sort of CKS sound? Are you picking words because they have this other kind of sound? And you were.
Yes.
And you absolutely were. And it was, I just loved it. I was like, yes, I figured that out. It was very rewarding.
Well, that's good. It was very intentional. Everything about this book was very intentional.
There's I'm going to ask you to read an excerpt if that's all right. But there was one part where I think did a great job of summing up the experience of reading the book. And I just want to mention it. A moment in the book where you're talking about being a teenager getting into an accident at night. Mm-hmm. And I think this is such a wonderful example of the playfulness and the sounds. And you talk about Officer Clicky and the click, click, click sounds of the pen. And then, combined with this sort of fact-filled context, the story of government-run accident programs, anti-crash programs. And then it goes right back to photography with the idea of the X key that toggles back and forth between the foreground and background, the black and white foreground background inside Adobe and the swatches of color. And that is such a great example of the way the book flows, like this very personal thing, and then this cultural or societal thing, and then this connection to photography. It's really wonderful.
Thank you. The way it turned out was very different from the way that I imagined it when it first came into my being, because as a very brief origin story, I was on a critique of some photo seniors at RISD with other faculty and guests, and we were looking at this one particular student's work, Owen McCarter, and he had all these photographs of crossed trees. And they were beautiful pictures, and they stayed with me. And after the call, this was in the spring of 2020, So I was homeschooling, and those of us who were teaching were mostly at home. My daughter and I went for a walk afterward, and I couldn't unsee the letter X from what I was seeing on this walk because I had Owen's crossed trees in my head. And so I would see it on license plates, and I saw it on other trees, and I saw it in architecture. And when I got back home after this walk, I made a few notes. I got in touch with Owen. I said, Owen, and I talked about his pictures and then said, I think there's something in the relationship between photography and the letter X. And that's really where it began. So I thought it was going to be a much more formal book about the history of photography and the history of this character or this letter and how they had intersected or crossed over in different ways. But I kept referring back to stories from my own history where the letter X appeared. And honestly, I probably could have picked any letter of the alphabet, but the one that kept coming was the letter X. And that's what I felt was pulling the story along. It wasn't just about photography, and it wasn't just about this character. It was also about the way in which, if you pay attention to something and how it might have influenced or affected different parts of your life, that you can probably find relationships between triangulations of things. So everything that was in there about like the sounds of things you were talking about, like the sonic characteristics and the nature of the book, I made sure as much as I could that there were lots of words in there that had a letter X or a CK, a sound. I mean, a lot of my upbringing was about the sonic nature of the world. I can still tell you if I am standing down at my father's dairy or where it used to be, I can tell you the type of car that's coming down the hill based on how the engine sounds, because I had years and years and years of sonic training. I know what a fox sounds like at a particular time of day. I know what a rabbit sounds like in distress. I know what it sounds like when a cow falls over in the paddock and it's not a good falling over sound. There are just these things that stayed with. So all of that sonic, all of that sort of was embedded into the book as well. And actually Mike and Tricia at the Ice Plant helped a lot with that. They're extraordinary editors and thinkers, and they asked the most sensational questions that improved it.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I think you did pick the right letter when it comes to photography. I mean, we think about all the Kodak films that you mentioned, the Plus X, the Pan X, and the Tri-X, of course, and then SX70, Polaroid. And I mean, you clearly did. In fact, there's this beautiful connection when you're talking about Sally Mann and the Kodak X-ray box, and you were just talking about X-rays and the whole. I mean, the X-ray is a rich history in photography. It became a novelty. It became a life-threatening novelty in photography.
Right, and one of my favorites was discovering that Robert Capa had come up with the phrase that we now understand Generation X or Gen X to be, that was something that Robert Capa came up with. So the more I researched, the more I found and the more surprised and delighted I was.
Would you mind reading a passage? Because one of the things I kept imagining is what it must have sounded like to you to write it. And did you have a particular voice in your head of your own, or the pace? And that's the other thing, like how slow or fast should I be thinking about this as I'm reading it? Because it felt fast to me. It felt very fast. It felt like I needed to keep the speed going, like keep my foot on the gas while I was reading it, because I wanted to get to the next connection.
I'm so happy you said that, because one thing I found as I was writing it, I would read it aloud. So I would write and then I read aloud to myself. And I knew that when I got to a point for reading aloud is hard anyway. But when you're reading aloud to yourself and you're trying to pay attention, I would be very aware that I would get breathless by a point, because I felt like the words were carrying me or speeding me up or asking me to be quick. And there's so much about this, this is 20, 30, 40 years of me going back and thinking about history and memories that have come to define or have shaped me in some way. It's gone so quick, and I wanted there to be a pace where it was almost like, of course, you could put this book down and feasibly come back to it. But I wanted it to almost feel like that was at risk, that if you put it down, you were going to be at risk of not knowing, and you kind of had to know. You needed to know if the connections were making sense, or you needed to know if you were going to get to that thing that you thought might be coming but you were really uncertain of. I wanted there to be a sense of haste.
Absolutely. Oh, so that was it. I felt it.
Yeah. Because so much of farm life is, on the one hand, it seems, and especially as a kid, incredibly slow, and you're just waiting for the next thing and the next thing, and your weekends pass by with like at the speed of slug. And then on the other hand, it feels so fast, not retrospectively looking back going, oh, wow, that time went really fast. It's that logistically and practically farm life is just nonstop because you never get a day off. You are always working. You are always thinking about the next thing that you're going to have to troubleshoot or the next problem that you're going to solve. And there's really no rest time. Sleeping is, you've got your half an ear open because you're thinking, are the cows going to escape the paddock? Is someone going to fall in the river? Is there going to be some kind of explosion?
Well, animals and weather don't wait for you. Yeah.
They most certainly do not. Yes, that's good. I like that. Okay, so a part to read. I'm going to choose a part that I know that Mike Slack really likes. I like it too, but it's one that it comes right toward the end of the book where this is probably the only part, the last chapter, chapter 10, which in Roman numerals is a letter X, where it starts to feel like you are slowing down a little bit and you are being a bit more meditative. And even though it's the shortest chapter, I still find it the hardest to read quickly, even though I wrote it, because it's reflective thinking about everything that's come before means you're wondering not if it really happened, but what it was all for or what it all meant. So, walking into nowhere is what I do when looking at a photograph. It is also where I mentally go when I take a picture. I make decisions, this location, not that. The world slow dissolves behind me and beside me. Only what is frontal solidifies, and even then details bleed. When I point my camera at the thing I'm attracted to, I birth an unreal world. My mind and the camera evolve it. When I take the camera away from my eye, I'm a runaway racehorse, sweating, panting, and wild into nowhere. My camera and I belong nowhere, have never belonged anywhere. Not where I was born and raised, not in the rectangles in which flesh and paper versions of me live. I like photographing in nowhere because no one tells me I'm doing it wrong. No one cares if I have a camera. I can look any way I want. There are no catcalls or suspicious looks. Nowhere is where I fit in. Nowhere is where I go when I look back because I can't ever be back. The place I love isn't there anymore. It's nowhere, a kingdom all its own. And the only thing that marks the spot of my walking into nowhere is nothing. In nowhere, I'm a good kind of no one, nameless and alone.
And that gets back to the idea that you, when you mentioned being visible and becoming invisible at the same time, there is such a thread that runs through your work in terms of your family history, being a mother and being a photographer. And it's so connected that it actually makes it like you're following something when we look at your work, when we look at books sort of in order, or at least, the last three. It's a wonderful way to, I think, bring the audience into your life. And do you think about audience at all when you're making the work?
I don't, and I'm not doing that because if I did, I'm not sure I would make. Mm-hmm. I'm always generating something that I'm intrigued by, that I'm curious by, that I don't understand fully, that I don't want to necessarily understand fully. I just want to unravel it just enough. Mm-hmm. I think most of my work is where I'm always revealing. The people who know me really well will say, Odette's the most private person. She won't tell you stuff. I'm like, that's probably because it all comes out in my work.
That's right.
It's always like I had 7 incredible readers. I sent them a near final draft. I printed it out and I sent it to them. And they all commented and I said they could keep their copies. But the 2 things that came back from almost all of these people that I love and trust, one was, how do you share these things that are so incredibly private and personal and so revealing about you? And the second thing was, did this cow drop place really exist? That was the part they really wanted to know. It was like, was this place real? It wasn't that they weren't going through going, oh, that couldn't have happened and that couldn't have happened.
Right.
And that's too serendipitous. It was, no, there can't really be this place where you take cattle as their final resting place into this giant outdoor open air pit.
I never questioned the truthfulness as I was reading it because it all felt so personal and authentic. And I should restate, if I didn't state, this is autobiographical. This is even if it reads as somewhat kind of external when you give kind of like facts and figures, or you talk about someone else's work or someone else's life, that it is still very autobiographical, because all of this is who you are. I mean, this is, if anything, it's more, because I feel like we're also looking into your mind quite a bit when we're reading this book.
Right. I read a lot and I watch a lot. And I make notes on things that I read and watch. And sometimes they come in useful for things like this. And I do quote a lot of films or poetry or philosophy. I quote a lot of imagery, not just my own, but I'm also telling stories of things that actually happened. And that was one nice thing too. So far, no one has said to me, oh, that can't possibly be true. Mm-hmm. And on the one hand, I'd say, well, every photograph has a form of fiction built into it. And when we add words to a picture, we are adding fiction to something that already exists in the world fictitiously somewhat.
Right.
And I'm also borrowing from memory to even remember some of these things that happened 40 years ago. Of course, I'm having to forget something in order to remember this other little snippet. And I would call my mum and dad and say, so did Uncle Gary really have this type of motorbike? Or did my great-granddad really die because he was beheaded by an oncoming car? Like I wanted things to be as real and as factual as they could be. But I also completely understanding that thing that Sally Mann writes about so beautifully in Hold Still and in Artwork, that you cannot untether yourself from there being some slipperiness in there, because you cannot hold every fact. Was there really a cow drop? Yes. Was my brother's nickname? Yes. All of these things occurred, but was there a skeleton really buried under this telephone box? Yes. Yeah. So far, no one has questioned that, but I think because, as you say, I haven't held back. If I'm going to reveal, then I'm going to do it like with extra icing.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, there's this rhythm. It feels very kind of like poetry slam or spoken word kind of, and even a little improvisational, like someone gave me 3 topics, the letter X, photography, and a farm, right? And it feels like you sort of play off that, but it's kind of in reverse, because you have the stories, and what you're doing is then connecting them through certain anchors in the work.
Right. I think that's the only way I know how to produce work. It has to be something I am intrigued by, something I love or that I'm in love with. But a little insight into my writing practice, I do sit and write in notebooks, but part of the reason why my writing sounds the way it does is because I record while I'm driving. So I often have to be, or when I'm at an airport or when I'm on a bus, because there's something about removing myself into my home environment or my studio environment and being in transit, that it frees my mind to be able to speak a story. And when I speak it, quite often I keep the rhythm of speaking in the writing, even though it sounds a bit disjointed at times. There's something that feels much more genuine and sincere to the kind of person I am by throwing the words out of my body into the space of my car or the bus or the wherever I am. And I try to maintain some of that.
Yeah. Well, not that this is the same, but when I have to do research for a guest, what I'll do is I'll look at everything at home. I'll read everything at home. If I can listen to an audiobook, of course I will as well. But while I'm driving is when I actually think about what I want to ask or or how I reflect upon something. And then that's when I hit my memo recorder. And so everything from this show that I've asked you, I recorded in the car.
Cars are magical spaces. There's something very special about the inside of a car that I don't know what it does to my mind, but it's nice. I like it.
Well, I'm adding this to the canon of what I consider like getting excited about reading books about photography again, because, it started with photo work with Sasha Wolf, when that was sort of my re-entry, because I had read all the classics and the treatise on photography, and then I sort of just stopped. And then, I read that, and then of course, I read Tim Carpenter's To Photograph is to Learn How to Die. And of course, this book gets compared to that a lot because that is also a bit of mental gymnastics while you're reading it. And then I read Annika Burgess's Flashes of Brilliance and had her on the show too. And now this. And I really think it's exciting and how photography and how photo history is still being reinterpreted and brought to life again, and that there are new connections being made and relevance to our lives. And, I consider this one of those books. Having that personal connection, I think, is so meaningful.
Oh, well, thank you. I wanted to create something that I would want to read. And I like short, quick books. I like books where you could just read one chapter, but that there's something that grabs you. And I don't consider myself an extraordinary writer, but I am very disciplined in my writing. And I take a lot of care, I think, with finding the right paragraph or the right sentence. And that was elevated enormously with Mike and Tricia. Mike and I remember getting on this one phone call and we thought, well, this will be an hour or two. And it must have been 4 or 5 hours later because he would speak the sentence and he would taste the words and then I would speak it back to him. And I'm sure if we were listening to that as a recording, it would sound super weird. But we would repeat parts back to one another until we landed on just the right tenor and just the right expression. And I would go to bed thinking about the word sizzling, going, wait, is this the right word? We would really nerd out over alliteration and metaphor and his English brain is extraordinary. And we would have a good giggle. I would say very dumb things and he would very politely laugh at my dumb things, trying to wield our wands over one paragraph. So
I love that. I love that so much. And speaking of dumb things, can we end with a dad joke from your dad?
A dad joke from my dad? Oh dear.
That's in the book. It's in the book.
Yes, I know.
I'll set you up.
It is. See, my mind immediately goes to all his terribly
all
dirty...
his other jokes.
All his terribly dirty, unrepeatable jokes.
So here's the very clean, innocent joke that's in the book. What do dentists call their x-rays?
Toothpicks.
I mean, I did laugh out loud in the car when I thought of that. Yes.
It's so tacky. My mum and dad, bless them. They're so, someone said to me the other day, what do your parents think of all your books? And I said, my parents have never opened one of my books. They just nod and they smile and they say, that's nice, dear. That's lovely. And they're very aware that they're a huge part of my practice. And my father now refuses to get too involved in anything that I do. But yes. I love that they're incredibly supportive in a distance and just say, that's wonderful. And then they tell all their friends at the fruit shop because they still live rurally. And they're like, so Odette's done another book. And they'll go, oh, that's nice. What's it about? And they'll say, oh, we don't know, but I'm sure it's lovely,
Right. It's true, though. I have a kind of freedom when I talk about my family and my family history because my family doesn't listen to my podcast.
No, Michael, that's so sad. No,
I think it's great. I'm okay with that.
That's funny.
Why would they listen to a photography podcast?
Well, exactly. If I told you honestly what my dad thought of photography, I mean, it's not cool. But that's a whole other book.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Well, thank you so much. This has been really wonderful catching up with you.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to have been part of it. And your questions they've made me do like mental gymnastics. I'll think about all the best answers in about 3 days' time.
Oh, good. Okay. No, this was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Real Photo Show is produced by me, Michael Chovan-Dalton. Music by Matteo Chovan-Dalton and Jim Raimundo. If you like the show, please rate and review with all the stars on your listening platform.